Well, obviously, this depended a good deal not merely on individual students, but also where they went in the United States. But the three general themes that you tended to hear was, first, that American students of political science study trivial things. They don't ask really important questions. And so you see a lot of, you have to take courses and you get very trivial. Secondly, but associated with that, of course, is the strength of the focus of American political science on elections. Right? Now, they pretty well know they're not going to have any elections. Or if they're going to have them, they're going to be rather different than, so the electoralism, I suppose, also, it doesn't make a lot of sense to study competitive election behavior and go to China. Right? Even at that local level, it's not really competitive, and certainly no sense that we would recognize it. But I think also, there's something that's not easy to grasp, although I must say I've encountered it several times in working in different countries, and that is this, but I think the Chinese have it more intensively than any place I've experienced, and that is the sense of being culturally different or distinctive. So I think what they come back from, especially if they get exposed to this highly individualistic, rational choice kind of paradigm, let's call it, that, it's not us. This is, actually, in some ways, I think the Chinese are probably more, if I'm just observing their behavior, they are really capitalists. They're, particularly in a place like Shanghai and the bigger cities, of course. So in some ways, maybe they're more rational egotists than even Americans are. But they still don't think of themselves that way. And so they see this kind of model of human behavior as simply unrealistic or inappropriate for what they think is the nature of their culture. But it's a culture which is changing so rapidly that, it's very strange. It's probably the most rapid cultural transformation anybody could possibly observe, and yet they don't believe it. They believe that its material is changing, but the culture, Chinese culture, is still distinctive, unique, and continuous.
Gentleman over there.
Oh, Leonard.
Oh, this.
Leonard.
I enjoyed very much your presentation, and I think that one of the strong points that I totally share is that it's not a north-south thing or east-west, but that ideas emerge everywhere, and what you really need is to combine them in different settings. One of the issues that I have been concerned lately is that I think that we don't have a good narrative of democracy. I think that the narrative of democracy that we have is a narrative of old, very well-established democracies that they show the path. And what I think that we are facing in politics today is precisely the fact that the old well-established democracy, they do not show the path. So I think that one of the tasks that is posed for political science is how to reconstruct narratives, or the narrative of what democracy is. In this regard, I have been working on that, and one of the gaps that I really see in the narrative of democracy today is a good account of the emergence of democracy in India. The emergency of democracy in India, in the Indian subcontinent, because it's almost simultaneous to the consolidation of democracy in the US and Britain and a few countries in the moment in which most of the European continent was non-democratic. On the other hand, it brought to the democratic culture, democratic politics, a completely different culture. And still, I think that I haven't seen any good work that can really connect the Anglo-Saxon democracy narrative with India and other narratives. So basically 2 questions. how to reconstruct the democratic narrative, taking pieces from everywhere in the way I think you have shown in your lecture. Second, which kind of importance the Chinese give to the fact that democracy exists in India along different lines of the Anglo-Saxon tradition?
Well, in addition to Antarctica, one of the places I've never been is India. Okay, so I really hesitate to say anything about the second. But one of the things that was important in the way you phrased the question is that you moved from deficiencies in the analysis of democracy to what democracy is, and they're connected. In other words, the problem is defining democracy and then what is an appropriate set of instruments, concepts, etc., for analyzing it. And I would rather agree with you that we don't. This is one reason why in my work recently I use the concept only of real existing democracy. These are not really democracies. This is roughly the same inspiration that Robert Dahl had when he tried to get everybody to talk about polyarchy instead of democracy. So the word democracy is has such a patina of different uses that it's very, very difficult. So I like to just say real existing democracies. Right? And that has this very huge range. So there's only 3 conditions for real existing. The country claims to be democratic. Other countries that have claimed to be democratic and gotten away with it already accept the country as democratic. Right? So it's a club. Right? There's no more than a club. Right? And finally, most political scientists using Robert Dahl's criteria would classify it, you know, the famous 7, whatever it is, the polyarchy would also agree with this nominalistic approach. And I think when you think of democracy that way, and you especially think of it as the product of a sequence of historical compromises, and those compromises are different in different places. Right? And that's what I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow in Tullio's Institute on the future of democracy. And I think there again, Robert Dahl had the right idea, that if you're studying democracy, you must begin with an understanding that it's a moving target. It's always changing. Now, he defines or identifies 3 revolutions, and I've been working at identifying 4 or 5 other revolutions since then. Right? So the idea is to define democracy in a way that captures its transformations, so to speak. Right? Now, in my work with Terry Carl, the core that I've used is this business of accountability to citizens. Right? So that I find, so citizenship is the most distinctive property of democracy. And then you have these mechanisms of accountability. And the importance of that is, and this is why I think we may be agreeing with each other about what the deficiencies, is that elections are not, even in some cases, the principal, much less not the exclusive mechanism of accountability. And yet you can read an awful lot of democratic theory and it stops there. If elections are free and fair and if they're basta. It's democratic, so to speak, because there's a mechanism of accountability and you can throw the bastards out after they've done whatever they've done. Right? So that's and I think that's part of the problem, is the analysis has to think of democracy as a process, and it has to recognize that accountability is a much more complicated, multi-layered phenomenon. And then the trick is to first operationalize this very difficult concept of accountability. That's given me a lot of headaches, right? That seems to be at the core. And then, how have those mechanisms of accountability changed over time? So that you're not using some, let's say, antiquated or antique conception of democracy in order to understand it.